Picture the desert of ancient Mesopotamia, dry winds blowing across the sand as the sun begins to set in a copper-red sky. A line of figures descends slowly into the earth, their white robes stirring in the dusk. They do not speak. Their hands are folded. Their eyes do not look around. Beneath their feet lies a tomb newly carved, filled with treasures beyond counting, gold chalices, silver daggers, lapis lazuli beads, and at its center, the lifeless body of a king, wrapped in linen, lips painted, chest heavy with ornaments no longer meant to impress the living. Around him, soft cushions have been laid. Perfumed oil fills the air. Incense still burns in copper dishes. Everything is ready. But this is not where the story ends. It's where something far darker begins. Because the women who walk into this tomb do not come to say goodbye. They come to stay. Some are young, barely past childhood. Some are older, with lines beneath their eyes and hands calloused from years of quiet service. They are wives, concubines, musicians, attendants, chosen not for their sins, nor for their honors, but because the man they served in life is now dead, and someone has decided they must follow. There is no ceremony for their goodbye, no prayers lifted in their names. They kneel in rows beside the king, their bodies arranged with precision, as if even in death they must serve in perfect order. Their hair is combed, their jewelry adjusted, their lips still shine with pigment. Some hold golden cups, as if frozen in a toast. Others lie with their hands crossed over their chests, heads tilted toward the king's lifeless form. Centuries later, their silence would be broken not by voices, but by spades when archaeologists uncovered these tombs beneath the city of in modern-day Iraq. What they found beneath the earth was not just death, but obedience fossilized, rows of female bodies, perfectly preserved, surrounded by instruments, ornaments, and ritual tools. Each one a reminder that in a kingdom ruled by absolute power, even death was not enough to set these women free. They had no monuments, no names carved into stone, only the weight of the earth above them and a king beside them. More important in death than they were in life. The year was 1927. In the scorching heat of southern Iraq, under the supervision of British archaeologist Leonard Woolley, a team of workers unearthed something that would shake the foundations of everything historians thought they knew about ancient kingship. What began as a routine excavation in the royal cemetery of turned into a burial ground of unease and wonder. They had expected to find the usual a nobleman, perhaps a queen, some pottery, maybe inscriptions. But what they discovered were death pits, vast and deliberate, each one echoing a silence too orchestrated to be natural. In one shaft, over 70 bodies lay side by side, not haphazardly tossed, not burned or mutilated, but positioned with intention, each woman dressed in intricate garments, heavy with golden headdresses shaped like leaves and rosettes, elaborate earrings, and silver hair rings. They wore thick belts of gold. The bodies had not been scattered by violence or decay. They rested in unnerving peace, as if they had simply laid down, closed their eyes, and never got back up. Among the artifacts were musical instruments, harps with silver frames and bull's head carvings, still standing beside the women who once played them. Small cups rested near their hands. Woolley and his team noticed something strange. Many of the skulls had fractures, clean but deadly. Theories followed. Were these blows meant to hasten death after ritual drugging? Were they struck after losing consciousness? Or did they resist at the last moment, only to be silenced before entering the tomb? The answers were not written anywhere. The women left no testimonies. The cuneiform tablets spoke only of kings and gods, and yet their silence was loud. These were not battlefield deaths. They were not sacrifices to appease angry deities. These were orchestrated deaths carried out with ceremony, but void of compassion. Someone had planned every detail: the jewelry, the arrangement, the scent of myrrh in the chamber. These were not voluntary acts. No text confirms that the women stepped forward to die with joy or duty. And even if they had, what choice did they truly have? To refuse would mean betrayal. To question was treason. In a culture where kings ruled not just over land but over souls, their word was law and their desire was divine decree. The king died, and so the world around him had to follow. One of the most infamous burial pits, dubbed the Great Death Pit, contained 68 women and 6 men guards, perhaps, or eunuchs who shared their fate. There was no sign of struggle, but that only made the discovery more disturbing. It was the perfection of the scene that unsettled the most. Death should be chaotic, unpredictable, but this was theater, final, absolute. Woolley believed the women drank a potion, possibly opium or some poison, that put them into sleep, and were then lowered into the chamber, where they died. But further examination of the remains cast doubt. Some showed trauma inconsistent with peaceful passing. Some skulls were cracked. The staging had been meticulous, but the truth bled through the symmetry. These were not honored wives entering paradise. They were living offerings, turned into relics before their time. And above them, always, lay the king enshrined in opulence, untouched by the same quiet horror that surrounded him. His body rested at the center of the tomb, as if the universe revolved around his stillness. The women, however adorned, were satellites discarded light caught in his gravity. No names were written for them. No laments were composed. Their beauty was captured in gold, but their stories were sealed in dust, and it would take nearly 4,000 years before someone would open the earth and look at those rows of still bodies and dare to ask who were they, really, and who decided they did not deserve to live beyond their king. Even now, no clear answer exists, just the echo of a decision made in silence and the soft collapse of ancient bones under the weight of obedience. She may have been no more than 17. Her name is lost, her voice never recorded, but her body, her final position in the tomb, tells part of the truth. She lay on her right side, hands folded neatly beneath her chin, a delicate golden ribbon woven into her hair. Beside her was a small bronze mirror, still polished after millennia. Her jewelry, though grand by modern standards, was nearly identical to that of the dozens of other women placed near her. Same rosettes, same coiled earrings, same heavy crown shaped like an open blossom. Individuality was not encouraged. In death, as in life, they were made to match. She had likely grown up inside palace walls, perhaps as a servant's daughter or a selected orphan, raised in seclusion for the role she would someday play: decorative, compliant, ever smiling. From her earliest days, she was taught to walk in measured steps, to lower her gaze, to pour wine without spilling a drop. And when she reached a certain age, her body no longer belonged to her. It belonged to the court, to tradition, to the throne. Her future was a procession of waiting, of pleasing, of preparing for moments she would never choose. Until one day, she was called to attend the king's journey. There were no farewells, no appeals, just a quiet summoning. The women chosen were not told they were being executed. It wasn't spoken in such plain terms. The palace had other words for it: nobility, devotion, honor. They were told they would accompany the king to eternity, that their sacrifice would secure favor with the gods. But behind the ceremonial language was something brutally simple: the king had died. And so now would they. Before the descent into the death pit, they were washed and perfumed, Their faces were powdered, their lips tinted with red ochre, hair was oiled and braided. Ritual adornment was part of the process, not just for presentation, but to strip them of anything human. They weren't people anymore, they were symbols, ornaments, extensions of the king's legacy. A procession led them through the narrow passage into the chamber. Torches lined the steps. Priests chanted. The air grew colder as they descended, stone swallowing sound and light. There may have been music, perhaps the very harp that would later be found beside one of the lifeless players. Down in the tomb, carpets had been laid, cushions arranged in ceremonial patterns. This wasn't a mass grave, it was a stage. And on that stage, they were seated according to rank, senior wives in front, younger concubines behind, musicians to one side, attendants scattered between them, each given a small cup either with opium to sedate or poison to kill outright. Some may have accepted it with trembling hands, others with numb compliance, but among the most unsettling details uncovered were the injuries: blunt force trauma, sharp breaks in bone. Not all had died peacefully. Some may have hesitated. Some may have wept, silently. But resistance was futile. Once inside, there was no return. The tomb was not just their prison, it was their grave, already sealed in purpose before a single foot touched the first step. The girl with the mirror would never look into it again. But it was placed near her anyway, as if to suggest she still had beauty to offer in death. This illusion of honor was repeated for each woman. The crown of gold, the harp in hand, the polished jewels. All of it was meant to dignify what had no dignity, the erasure of personhood in the name of power. Outside, the world continued. Farmers worked the fields. Merchants shouted in the marketplace. No public mourning was announced for the women. The king's death was monumental. Theirs was part of the footnote. Not even a line of poetry survived them. Not a name carved in stone, but they were real. Flesh and breath. Just days before. Now repurposed into eternal silence. And somewhere above, the sun set on the ziggurats and the rivers and the gods carved in clay, while deep beneath the earth, young girls lay side by side buried with a king they could not refuse, in a chamber designed to erase their voices forever. The chamber was quiet when the last torch flickered out. In that moment, what remained was not ceremony, nor ritual, nor prayer, but the dense stillness of death arranged like theater. Their bodies were placed with care, but the care was not for them. It was for the image, the illusion of loyalty, of chosen devotion, sealed in stone. And when the final stone was laid over the tomb, the women disappeared from history, folded into the king's afterlife, like fabric stitched into his robe. They would be remembered not as individuals, but as a collective presence, a necessary entourage, a final offering to a man who no longer breathed. Even in death, he demanded order, their limbs positioned, their faces turned, their jewelry placed with such precision, it was as though they still served. But they didn't. They couldn't. What lay beneath that tomb was not piety. It was power, enforced to the very end. Later generations would call them the king's women, a phrase stripped of name, of story, of soul. No record remains of who they loved, what they feared, what they dreamed of before the order came. They were not buried with their own possessions, no tokens of family, no letters, no symbols of personal faith, only what the palace allowed, what the death ritual dictated. Uniform, erased, and above them, the king rested alone, wrapped in fine linen, his face covered with a golden mask, his hands folded over a ceremonial dagger, his body untouched by violence, untouched by fear. He did not weep when the women died. He did not plead when they descended into the dark. He was already gone, and yet their fates remained chained to him, even as his heartbeat faded into myth. What the tomb reveals is not only the scale of submission, but the brilliance with which it was concealed, draped in gold, buried in song. But death, no matter how adorned, remains death. And the silence of those women curated, arranged, perfected speaks louder than any inscription carved above. She was found near the edge of the chamber, a lyre resting against her shoulder. Silver strings long decayed, but the carved bull's head still intact. Her fingers had stiffened mid-chord, her arms frozen in a position of performance, as if the music had been meant to follow the king into eternity. Archaeologists would call her the harpist, a nameless title to match the nameless face. But in that posture, half sitting, half collapsed, there was something more than ritual. There was resistance. She had not been placed like the others. Her body tilted at an angle, one leg folded under her, the other stretched as if she had shifted. Her head leaned back, not with grace, but weight. Her crown had slipped, resting against her temple. It looked accidental. It looked human. Was she playing in the final moments, instructed to summon beauty as the chamber filled with silence? Or had she been playing for herself? A last, private defiance, clinging to a melody no one else would remember. The lyre, ornate and still imposing after 3,000 years, was crafted for display. But what if she had refused to be decorative? What if her final act was not submission, but expression? The position of her body suggests struggle, not violent just enough to mark her as different. A shoulder raised slightly, a hand splayed awkwardly across the strings. These were not the gestures of peace. They were the remnants of tension, of motion interrupted. Her song, whatever it was, ended not with applause, but with burial. She was silenced with the rest. Yet hers is the image that endures, the lone musician in a sea of silence, not standing above the ritual, not escaping its grip, but leaving behind a trace of presence that refuses to disappear completely. In a world that taught women to vanish in obedience, she lingered in posture, in gesture, in the faint outline of interrupted sound. And maybe that is what remains, the faint suggestion that within that tomb, lined with gold and shadow, not every woman accepted her fate in silence. One played, one shifted, one broke the stillness, if only for a breath, before the earth swallowed her song. By the time the tomb was sealed, their names were already gone, not whispered, not written, not remembered. The final act of violence wasn't the poison or the blunt force, it was the erasure. These women did not die as individuals. They were transformed into function, into sacred objects, into background. Every bracelet on their wrist, every necklace draped across their chest, was chosen not for personal meaning, but for display. They wore what the king's burial required, not what their lives had earned. No amulets from home, no charms of protection passed down from mothers. The things that might have told their stories were replaced with polished gold and matching ornaments, mass-produced symbols of compliance. They were not mourned, they were arranged. Even the language around their deaths was designed to cleanse guilt. In temple inscriptions, their sacrifice is referred to as a joining, a passage, but there was no passage, no joining. There was only stillness and silence. Their existence became a form of architecture supporting the afterlife of a man too important to go alone. The king needed beauty. The king needed music. The king needed shadows who would never speak. And so they were reduced deliberately, systematically, from daughters and lovers and friends to curated silence in human form. The most painful truth is not how they died, but how effectively They were made to disappear. Their voices did not echo through time. Their memories were not carved into clay. Only their positions, kneeling, reclining, waiting, survived, as if they were never meant to be known, only seen. And perhaps that was the final design, to bury not just their bodies, but their identities, to ensure that no one, centuries later, could look upon those golden crowns and ask, who was she? Really, what did she love? What did she fear when the chamber closed and the light disappeared forever? There are no answers in the tomb, only silence and the weight of absence made permanent. Centuries passed. The desert shifted, cities fell, empires burned, and the women remained undisturbed, unnamed, untouched beneath the earth, lying beside a king who would always matter more. Above them, generations came and went, building temples, waging wars, telling stories of gods and heroes. But no story was told for them. And yet, when their tombs were finally opened, their silence became unbearable. There was something in the symmetry, in the perfection of their arrangement, that felt unnatural. It was too still, too exact, as if grief had been choreographed, as if obedience had been fossilized. But the women were not obedient by choice. Their stillness was not peace, it was command. The gold on their brows was not a crown, it was a seal. And the truth, once unearthed, refused to stay buried. Because now we know they didn't volunteer. They didn't ask to go. They didn't stand in line to drink poison for glory. They were chosen, called, prepared, silenced. Their stories never told, their faces never remembered. They were erased to serve a memory that was not theirs. And so the question remains, not just for the tombs of but for every place where power has demanded silence. What would have happened if even one of them had said no? If one girl had stepped back at the threshold? If one musician had refused to play? If one concubine had wept aloud instead of bowing her head? Would the ritual have cracked? Would the illusion have fractured? We will never know, because no one said no. Or if they did, the silence buried them deeper. But their presence still lingers. In the curve of a wrist, in a harp string that never played its final note, in the fragile crown that slipped from a brow just before the tomb closed, traces of resistance that the ceremony could not completely erase. They were not wives of eternity. They were not handmaidens to the afterlife. They were women young, breathing, human turned into ghosts for someone else's glory. And though their voices were taken from them, their stillness now speaks, not in praise, but in warning.